So thank you, everybody. We have a great panel lined up for you this morning. I'm really excited to be here with some of, I think, some of the most impactful work that we've been doing and some of the key folks that have made that all happen. So the theme of our panel this morning is research in action. And to my mind, that really means research impact. And so, like I said, what we've done is to select, I think, one of the most large-scale, impactful pieces of work at the moment to highlight in this particular panel today. Not that the other work isn't impactful, but I think this is one of the opportunities for really looking at things at scale that's quite unique, and it's not something we often get to do. The reason we focused on this particular piece of work is that I think for the last couple of years now, there's been a real sea change in the way that the department does software acquisition. And some of that has been a long time coming, but it's really come to a head all at once. And I think that seeing how this is all impacting multiple actors in the acquisition ecosystem all at the same time makes us quite exciting. The department has gone from, I would say maybe 2 to 3 years ago, we had a number of Pathfinder programs that were, I think, doing very forward-leaning work in terms of trying out topics like Agile, software engineering, like Lean, DevSecOps. And since then, what we've gone to is a place where we're trying to institutionalize it. So really get these benefits, these lessons learned now working at scale. So today, what we'd like to do is to talk about how we've made that transformation from Pathfinders to hopefully supporting these new modern software approaches as business as usual. And I think the thing that we'd like to highlight is that underneath it all, there's a lot of evidence, there's a lot of rigor. This is really evidence-based policy making writ large. That this is all kind of research impact, but with good research behind it. And so I want to talk about that tension today between the impact and, of course, the rigor and the good work that's gone into it. So let me introduce our panelists. So with me today, like I said, we have a number of people that have been doing this work in helping this all happen at scale. Sean Brady is Software Acquisition Pathway Lead in USD A&S Acquisition Enablers. So Sean oversees the new software acquisition policy, which we'll talk a lot about as we go through the 45 minutes we have here today. Before that, he was a learning director at Defense Acquisition University, so helping the workforce come up to speed with some of these capabilities. And I think before that, as the deputy director for software engineering and system engineering. Dr. Amy Henninger is the Senior Advisor for Software and Cybersecurity in the Office for the Director of Operational Test and Evaluation. Amy's a published researcher with a long track record of looking at software assurance type issues, but she was also one of the folks that led the response to the new software policy, representing the test and evaluation community and that very important set of equities. So I'll ask her to talk a little bit about that today. But also, Amy is one of the leads for a new set of congressionally mandated pilots looking at digital engineering in the department. And that's obviously going to be key to the continued transformation. And there's a lot of evidence collection and aggregation behind that. So we'll talk a bit about that today, too. Mr. Shane Ficcarelli is one of our own from SEI. He's our subject matter expert for a lot of the DevSecOps works that have happened in these activities. And DevSecOps, as we'll hear, is one of the key enabling technologies, I think, that's been called out for helping this happen at scale. So we're very anxious to get his perspective on all this work. And I should say, too, Shane has a master's in IS policy, I believe. So I think he's been really instrumental in working, again, at the intersection of technology and policy. And finally, my co-host, Linda Parker Gates, is SEI's initiative lead for the software acquisition and pathways work that we do at SEI. She's also an expert in change management, and she's published on topics including Agile at scale, which you'll hear is, I think, very central to the technical work that we're talking about today. So what I'll ask as we go forward is, what I would like to do is to have the audience put any questions for clarifications into the chat box, so that if we're going along and talking about things that we need to explain better, Linda will be monitoring the chat box, and we'll get the chance to do that in real time. And then for the last 10 to 15 minutes of our session today, we'll also take questions and answers from the audience. So we'll get to have a bit more interaction too with our panelists. Okay. So let's start. What I have is one question teed up for each of our panelists to do a little bit by way of a technical introduction, I guess. So I'll start with Sean. Because like I said, I think a lot of what we've been talking about in terms of influencing practice at scale has really come to a head through the new software acquisition policy. That's all of, about a month old, I think. Yeah. I was going to ask you, Sean, if you could talk a little bit about what that policy is and how it's so different from what's there before, but also talk about what was done in the department to make sure that was technically sound, the good research and engineering that went into it.
Awesome. So thanks for having me, Forrest. Really appreciate this. And it's great to be joined with Shane and Amy. Looking forward to the discussion. But absolutely. So you're right. The policy was just published on the 2nd of October. So Ms. Lord signed it out on the 28th, but it actually went live on 2 October. And it really is, in my opinion, I'm a little biased, but it's the newest and most exciting software pathway within the adaptive acquisition framework. And this is the 6th pathway that program managers can be creative and select to acquire capability in the department. And what's so cool about this is for a very long period of time, the department has used an industrial mindset, an industrial age mindset. Hey, General Hyten used to talk about, is it appropriate to acquire a tank in the exact same way that you would acquire a digital or cloud native capability? So now the department has something that's natively built to acquire digital capabilities, and it's very cool. Overall, the adaptive acquisition framework is what our boss considers the biggest transformation in DoD acquisition in decades, and it's really focused on a couple of things. Tailoring is a big piece of it, but it transformed the policies, processes, and culture in the department by empowering PMs, delegating decisions. That's a huge theme for us in the software pathway. And not tailoring out, but tailoring in what you need as a program manager in terms of the regulatory documentation, and focused on data-driven decisions. As far as the pathway for software is concerned, there's a couple things I would highlight. Number one is it's natively built to support and unleash Agile and DevSecOps. So if there were any impediments for those modern philosophies and practices, the pathway tries to create the guardrails and the conditions to support them. Active user engagement is huge in the private sector. One of the things that we're trying to do is approximate commercial industry software development practices, including DevSecOps, but also trying to adopt business concepts and models that are from the private sector as well. And one of those is human-centered design, which is very common in Palo Alto, to try to mitigate risk and underscore you're really addressing an unmet need in the marketplace. So we mandate that, and user engagement is just such a core theme for the software pathway. It's critical, right? So the other thing is enterprise services are a first choice. So we really want programs to get economies of scale and focus as a mission owner on the applications that they're building. By leveraging existing enterprise services, they can do their job much more efficiently by gaining reciprocity from a security standpoint on that infrastructure and that core that you build upon, and then focus on securing your application layer. That's a huge force multiplier for the department and allows us to go fast. And the other piece is the production aspect of this. Congress was a great partner in this, and they really emphasized the fact that they need the software pathway to deliver as fast as 3 to 6 months. Now, the pathway policy itself mandates 1 year for operational deliveries, but crucially, we require by law and by policy that programs deliver to production within a year. That's a huge change for the department. And the other piece of this is automation. So a lot of research is going into how do we improve software delivery processes, and a big piece of that is automating things that typically occur at the very end state in big bang test events or security accreditations, and shifting that stuff all to the left. It's really hard to do that and have confidence as a program manager or as an assessing or an authorizing official if you don't have all the processes and automation set up on your program that gives trust to an authorizing official to release software, to test it rigorously in an automated fashion and push it into production. So I think all those conditions are brand new in terms of the software acquisition pathway policy. But to answer your second question in terms of how did we get there, I think that's one of the good news stories here. So we're pretty proud about this. I believe we may have set a land speed record in going from an interim policy to a full DoDI instruction. It took us 9 months to do that. And the reason we went so fast is because the demand signal in the department and from the services is very strong, right? We wanted to get this policy out there because we have a lot of folks that are excited to acquire capability this way. So that really went fast. We delivered 3 months earlier than we promised. We delivered a full year ahead of congressional expectations. And how that came together was basically, it was a very inclusive process, a co-development really with the services. So we listened to the pilot programs that you talked about. We had, no kidding, folks, boots on the ground that were pioneering some of these techniques through FY18 Agile pilots that were giving us lessons learned and feedback on how this software pathway policy should be structured. And that was huge for us. By leveraging that, we made sure we had all that goodness and learning really baked into this thing. And the other part is we just had good old-fashioned stakeholder engagement. We had war games with the services. Congress was a great partner in giving us feedback and really understanding what their strategic intent was. When it all came together, I think we have a policy that meets the strategic intent and also has buy-in from the services because they were such a huge part of helping to develop it. So hopefully, as we go forward and execute using this new pathway policy, we're going to see that it really enables programs. But we will admit there's tough areas that we don't know how to handle yet, including budgeting, how to most efficiently shift test and evaluation, this whole new thing of digital engineering. There's a lot of research going on there that we're going to need to figure out on how to improve the pathway and make it better. So make no mistake, we're going to be leading while we're learning here and improving the pathway as we go. So that's the once over the world in software pathway, Forrest.
That was a great answer, Sean, and especially you really teed it up perfectly because you ended there on the note about T&E in particular, and that's where I was going to ask Amy to come in and talk a little bit about that. I mean, Amy, from the test and evaluation point of view, I mean, I always look at that major tension has to get resolved in a way. I mean, between, as Sean said, the pathway trying to get capability out quickly, but the T&E and especially the operational test community saying, we can't put things out that aren't of high quality, that are going to address the mission needs, that are going to be useful for the warfighter. So I was going to ask if you could, again, by way of introduction, maybe talk a little bit about what the OT insights were based on the policy, and then where maybe the OT community is today in terms of thinking about modern software technologies and how they can help.
Yeah, thank you, Forrest. So first, let me take this opportunity to thank you for the invitation and the opportunity to serve on the panel. I'm especially glad that Nick could join us because between a Shane, a Sean, and a Shull, I was feeling a little outnumbered. So, Linda, welcome to the panel. I'm glad you could be here with us. I'm going to answer your second question first, and then get to how it impacts our support of the new policy. And the question about how does OT feel about modern software technologies? What's our thinking? What's the maturity that we're looking at here? It's a great question. There's a lot of nuances embedded in that question. I could talk to it probably for the rest of the session, but I'm not going to. I do, though, in the interest of time, want to highlight one important distinction that I think is embedded in that question, and I'm going to use that to frame my response. So the OTE community, operational test and evaluation, or even really the T&E community at large, has interest in modern software technologies in two ways, okay? Two ways. The first way is testing software, right? Or more appropriately, testing and evaluating software, because it's two things, T&E. So that's one way, testing software. The second way is using software to enable testing, or more appropriately, to enable testing and evaluation. So I know everybody out there can see that Venn diagram where we have one and the other separate sets, but not entirely mutually exclusive, right? So there's an overlapping section there, and that's important. So I'm going to start with the second part of that and talk about how operational test and evaluation uses software to enable OT&E. And I'll start this by giving you just a handful of examples, use cases, if you will, not comprehensive, but a smattering of the kinds of things we do to modernize tests with software. So we use software to generate synthetic worlds, integrate them with system and platforms, hardware in the loop, software in the loop capabilities, and threat models, oh, by the way, to generate data to support operational test and evaluation that otherwise couldn't even be collected. Okay, so some examples will include things like the Joint Simulation Environment. So that is an immersive virtual simulation supporting 5th-gen fighter mission requirements and testing needs for the F-35 Joint Strike Fighter, among others. And we need that environment to generate and validate and execute and create scenarios that supplement open air testing for the F-35. Very, very important software capability to testing. Another example, our National Cyber Range, which enables rapid emulation of complex, operationally representative network environments, along with red or the blue or the gray systems and networks that are with it, along with realistic traffic types, traffic flows, scales of traffic, along with customized implementation needed to interface proprietary systems, all integrated in a virtualized environment that allows us to test cyber, or a cyber-tested environment, if you will. As another example, we use open architecture technologies and distributed computing paradigms to rapidly develop, deploy, real-time, distributed, live, verbal, constructive applications that can connect digital with RF, with satellite, with proprietary vendor systems, with web apps, etc. Okay, this is across ranges, it's across systems, and allows us to do things like conduct a joint test between a Patriot battery at Whistler, a F-22 squadron at Edwards, and an Aegis combat zone on Arleigh-Burke class district in the Atlantic Ocean. So we have a lot of software in testing. We employ modern software technologies on the run to execute data management and the analytic tasks required to download and ingest and cleanse and correlate and integrate and analyze and distribute terabytes of data generated from a single F-35 flight test in less time than it takes to get that plane back into the hangar. And then finally, we work with the DoD High-Performance Computing Modernization Office to develop and validate massively parallel capability models of predicting shock trials that estimate damage because of weapons engagements. Obviously, they inform our assessments of system survivability. So there's a handful of examples, ways in which we use modernized software capabilities, whether it's big data systems, big data analytics, high-performance computing, parallel and distributed computing, audio code generation, digital twins, among others. And that gives you some data and thinking through really where is OT in the software space right now. Now let me address the other side of that dichotomy, right? What I presented before, testing software. Said another way, where is the OT community right now in terms of thinking about how to test software developed, deployed using modern software technologies? It's a little different question. And because I'm running out of time here, I'm going to be a little bit pithy in my response, but over the course of the panel, you'll hear more about this. So simply, operational test and evaluation does not test software. Okay, so we test systems, and those systems include software, but we don't test software in the sense of unit test or component test or integration test or application test. We do mission testing. We do systems and systems testing, but we do not do software testing. That's kind of an easy answer. But what I didn't say, and I'm going to do a double negative on you to get your big tables out. What I did say is that we can't use data from software testing to inform operational test and evaluation and to inform an independent assessment. We can, we should, we do, and we acknowledge that there's room for improvement. Activities like those enumerated by Dr. Shull early on in this presentation, among other things, helps us to do better. And as the DoD acquisition model moves from linear serial processes to an iterative incremental model that allows to do more stuff in parallel, the operational test and evaluation community under the superlative leadership of Honorable Bob Bueller is working to transform OT&E such that we can incrementally build a body of evidence over time, working in parallel with our peer group. Instead of relying on a big bang event at the end of what I think Dr. Shervis was, that called it a requirements, delay, surprise cycle, when I like to refer to as acquisition kill chain, which is another good description of how we do things in a waterfall process. So I saw a lot of good presentations yesterday that will help us do even better. Over the course of the panel discussion, I'll pepper in some examples of the kinds of things we're doing, how the demonstration that Dr. Shull talked about are helping us to do better, and then really share some applied research ideas with all the wonderful researchers at SEI and how I think we can move that far even further north, right? We have room to grow right now, but we can radically invent new T&E concepts to raise that bar and raise that potential and threshold, and I look forward to covering those over the course of the panel.
Great, thank you, Amy. I mean, I think that was a great list of very concrete examples, but I think what you helped us surface there, I think, was that big dichotomy between the, not only are we talking about software-enabled capabilities that we're trying to acquire and do the test, but also using more modern software in the testing process itself. And I think that's part, to my mind, of why this is such an exciting time, is that you see the growth and the capabilities and abilities on both sides of it. Thank you for that. And then let me go lastly to Shane by way of introduction. And like I said, Shane is our DevSecOps subject matter expert that's been part of a lot of these conversations. And as you've probably heard through the conversation so far, that level of DevSecOps infrastructure and automation and actually cultural change, I would say, is a big part of what's enabling this all to happen now all at the same time. So Shane, I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about, I think as we adopt some of these new technologies, at least some of the evidence or some of the research that's been done, looks at how these things have been used in commercial environments, and now we're bringing it into the DoD. I wonder if you could talk about, from your own experience, kind of what the difference is, if there is one, between the commercial, the defense environment, and how we're handling some of this in the defense context.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Forrest. And just to start off, I also, want to thank Sean and Amy for being here. It's great to, be part of the panel. But some of the main things that really differ from, the public to the private sector are, I would say, right off the bat, the approval process that the government struggles with to really get software, delivered in an iterative cadence, ATO, or what they're now moving towards with the continuous ATO process, just due to the nature of the types of software and systems that are being developed and deployed to. Much of the commercial industry software are, being deployed as services for businesses, whether it's a financial or any other type of healthcare or tech industry. But the government, they are not struggling, but challenged with deploying and basically testing software for integrated systems that have a pretty decent amount of hardware involved. So the amount of testing and rigor to actually ensure that the code and systems that are being delivered and deployed are doing what they're supposed to do is pretty much of the utmost importance, just due to its nature, the fact that there could be potential loss of life involved, with those systems. But, kind of piggybacking on what Sean had talked about with the new introduction of the new policy, DevSecOps and the tools and technologies that come along with that have really helped organizations to be able to tackle that challenge. Organizations like Kessel Run, for example, being able to implement the first really true CT, continuous authorization process, has really set a standard for organizations to, within the DoD, to, kind of have a goal, or to, understand that is possible, to be able to do that for mission critical systems.
Great, thanks, Shane. I like your point there too about Kessel Run, and I think when we look at Kessel Run and some of our other early adopters of some of these technologies, I think that again, like I said, I think part of what's been going on lately is studying those early adopters, doing some real rigorous analysis to make sure that what we're seeing there is good, but then trying to to take those examples out and institutionalize them, try to take the good and do it at scale. And that's an excellent lead into the next question. And this was going to be open for anybody. I thought maybe, Amy, you might want to take the first crack at it. I think a lot of how we've gone about doing this work and putting things into policy and taking these lessons learned and institutionalize them relied on, whether it be those early adopters or demo programs in the case of the digital engineering work, or our agile pilots in the case of the Section 873, 874. I wondered if you could just talk a little bit about, what to your mind makes a good pilot. I think that what we're looking at here is pulling evidence out, evidence in a sense that's going to give us the confidence to go off and do this at scale. And so, especially from a T&E point of view, where, like you said, folks deal with evidence all the time, wondered if you could talk a little bit about how these pilots or demos work in the larger ecosystem and what's a good one in your mind.
Yeah, Forrest, thank you. That's another great question. So, remember I said OT uses a lot of software technologies in our tests, and demos was to advance that, right, and looking at sort of the next level where we should be going. And we're just getting to those pilots for the 31 demos kicked off here, so I can't give you a lot of practical examples yet because we're sort of in the middle of that. I suppose since I have this opportunity, I want to be able to say that, give a shout out and recognition to the wonderful SEI team that's working with me on these demos, to include Dr. Shull and Ms. Nat Brown and David Shepard, all of whom have been absolutely spectacular to work with, and I do appreciate our partnership in sense. We have organized our thinking around sort of fundamental precept for that study, and that precept goes something like this: the analogy that digital engineering is system development deployment as DevSecOps is software development and deployment. And we're very focused on being interested in how you select those demos so we can tell a story where the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. There are lots of stories we tell, and there are lots of model audience we tell a story to. But we're leading towards making this product sort of a beacon in the community that can illuminate viewpoints, if you will, helping them understand art of the possible, right? So as we work through these demos and look at what we have now, where we could go, what is the potential, we see basically three major waypoints in the life cycle of a program or the maturity of the digital maturity approach. And that is linear gains, exponential gains, and enterprise gains. So linear speed up or linear gains at the program level, this applies to those programs that are adopting digital engineering enabling capabilities, technologies, and they are enjoying some benefit from that technology, better, faster, cheaper. But ultimately, what they're doing is digitizing analog process. Okay? They're gaining speed up. It's not a bad to do, it's a good thing to do, but there's a lot of potential yet untapped because basically digitizing analog process. There's a lot of that in the department. It's not bad. We can do better. Number two is exponential gains. Again, we're going to look at this at the program level. And this applies to those programs that are adopting, again, digital engineering, enabling technology capabilities. This time in an integrated way, such that there's a digital thread across digital processes. And this is more akin to what I think of as an N-squared model, where the whole really is greater than the sum of parts. We are making better than linear gains because we are actually digitizing multiple processes and integrating them in ways that allow us to develop new concepts or new ways of time. And then there's another really important third echelon, if you will, and I'm going to call that corporate gains. Okay? So these represent cases where the exponential gains are experienced from integrating multiple digital processes on a program through enterprise services and enterprise approaches to redesigning and integrating processes. This story is a little bit harder to sell to a program because when you do this at the enterprise level, it's not always easy to translate that into the program. But it's not impossible, and I promise we can eye on these cases. So the power of these demos, in my view, lies in the ability to showcase what we're doing, make progress toward advancing the requirement of the enterprise capability. And it's really in tune with that 3-tier model. I don't see us adding a lot of technology to these demos. I think it's doing a lot of integration in these demos. And as you said, Forrest, there are some early adopters. We want to build on what to get them to exponential CDEP or preferably enterprise CDEP, right? So that's where we're heading. We have a tremendous team led by Phil Zimmerman from Research and Engineering, tremendous support and great relationship with the staffers who have authored that language and tracking our progress. COVID-19 had its impact on us like it has with a lot of things. But I get the sense in working with steering the surface, there are a lot of smart people out there. They are like-minded. They understand the importance of doing this on the engineering side, especially side. And I'm honest and confident that we're going to have a great product, which includes a lot of practical content and a way forward business case for the department.
Hey, thank you, Amy. So that was a great answer. Though. Some of that was a little garbled at the end, so I'm going to ask if you could take a look in the chat. Well, I think we'll have you try to turn off your video and see if that helps with the audio. But while we do that, I'm going to see if Sean wanted to weigh in there, because I know that the Section 873 congressionally mandated pilots, I think, were one of the big sources of lessons learned for the software acquisition pathway. So I wondered if you wanted to take a shot at that one, Sean.
Yeah, sure. So in FY18, there was a whole set of 873 and 874 pilots is what we're calling them. That refers to the section within the NDAA. And our team within Acquisition Enablers, supported by folks like Forrest and others within SEI who do great work trying to help these programs that are compelled by Congress to transform from the old paradigm into this new agile world. And particularly with the 873 pilots for large-scale programs, they're looking at programs that have had challenges in the past and getting them on a new way of doing business, a new path to that direction. And so through that process and helping them try to plan and transition and learning from other pilots like Kessel Run, who is actually one of the 874 pilots, they were in a little bit more advanced state at the time they came into becoming a pilot. So that offered a lot of good lessons learned for us to take. But overall, I would say that these pilots are really pathfinders. We have a lot of programs that come to us and we get concerned, hey, across their portfolio, because this is so new and because the workforce doesn't necessarily have a culture that supports this or a skill set that supports this, are folks really going to beat down a path to adopt these new approaches to acquiring capability and developing it? And it's really important that these pathfinders generate lessons learned and show others in the department that we can do things differently. But absolutely, Forrest, these pilots helped inform things that are in the acquisition policy we have, such as minimum viable product. What does that mean from a DoD standpoint? I would say that through the work with these congressional pilots, we developed a whole set of guidance and lessons learned that continues to be available to programs. You can find that on the Community of Practice website that Forrest can get you a link to at DAU. But basically things like metrics. What are the right metrics and dashboard data that provide different layers, the right quantitative information to make data-driven decisions? So those are the sort of things that resulted from the pilots, and we're still working with them to figure things out. One of the things we're trying to figure out with the pilots that are doing this pioneering work is how to adopt multiple pathways within the adaptive acquisition framework. So a lot of trailblazing is yet to be done, but it is definitely an exciting time to learn, and we're grateful for these pilots and others that are willing to try out these new techniques. We need more lessons learned to give the rest of the department a confidence that they can adopt this and move out and get some quick wins. Absolutely.
And Shane, I wondered if there's anything you wanted to pile on there. I know from the data collection and analysis side, I think you've been really involved in the nitty-gritty stuff here. So I wondered if you had any thoughts on, just kind of how we do this in a defensible way that you might want to share.
Yeah, absolutely. I was just going to say, in addition to what, Sean had just said, that one of the advantages that we've had as pilot advisors is the fact that both the 873 and 874 programs span across all different types of software delivery. We have programs that are building out and delivering business systems. We have programs that are focused on embedded weapon systems. We have programs that are building and adopting COTS tools. So we are able to get, kind of all that experience from across the board and create, lessons learned and, do's, don'ts, and things like that for future and incoming programs, not really just focused on one specific type of software delivery, but pretty much any type of software or hardware that is being built out and deployed, under the sun across the department. We've had, really early adopter experience with.
Great, thanks. And
that's been extremely beneficial.
Yeah, great. I was going to say a great lead in there. There's one more question I wanted to get to. We'll see if we can hit it quickly, although I think we could spend the rest of the day on it. And then we'll see if we can get time for some Q&A from the audience. But I was going to throw this one to you first, Sean, because we've talked already about the pilots, the demos, the early adopters. I've tried to use that as a way to remind people that this is really evidence-based policy and evidence-based resourcing that we've been doing here to make sure that we can do this at scale. And one thing I've heard you talk about many times is that where we go from here is where we don't look at the lessons learned and then we're done forever. That we want to really get the DoD into a place where it's a true learning organization, where we keep track of these things over time. Get to see how it's learning, where things change, and what adaptations we have to do. So I wondered from the point of view of thinking of the DoD very ambitiously, maybe as a learning organization itself, what you might want to say there.
Yeah, sure. So I'm inspired by a comment that General Hyten made, which was enough prototyping. How do we scale, right? So I think we're at a point now where over the next decade, we really have got to scale out these techniques and get the entire ecosystem moving out. And the way we can do that is harnessing the lessons learned, yes, finding out where things went wrong, and then getting at the institutional leaders that have influence across entire portfolios. So one of the impediments to doing that is the fact that we have legacy systems. So we get all charged up. We have a great DoD DevSecOps reference design that helps programs understand the people, processes, and tools that help them move out. But then we're confronted by two constraints, which is architectural constraints and contractual constraints. So if we give a conservative estimate and say 90% of the programs and capability out there are legacy, that's a different problem set than just acquiring tech talent that can move you into some new cloud-based delivery, leveraging existing enterprise services in a greenfield situation. Some of the capability that we have, or a lot of it, has to transform. And with that comes the people, the cultures, and the traditions that are associated with that. So really what we need to do as leaders is treat change management as a core capability. There are companies out there in the private sector that have created like hockey stick growth. It's amazing. They're not tech companies, but basically what they do is they acquire companies that are mediocre performers, and then they turn them into all-stars by bringing a whole new way of doing business. And that starts with this entire educational process and a commitment to change management. So change management really has to become a core capability. It's a skill set. It's not like just saying, hey, there's a bunch of shiny tools here. Let's go through DevSecOps. You have a lot of work to do as a leader to make that happen. So two of the ways that we can look at that problem is, first of all, do we have a transformation team or an enablement team that you'll see in the private sector that helps move different parts of the business into a modern paradigm? Well, that's us, right? So we're acquisition enablers. So we are set up and designed to remove bureaucratic impediments, take the lessons learned that Shane was talking about, take the research that Amy was talking about and the wins there, and then sort of treating it like this Blue Force network where we evangelize and get that information into the hands of key influencers at the PEO level. For example, we're doing that with Marcor, right? Their leadership is setting a vision to move in this direction, and they need help on how do we institutionalize this new pathway policy in DevSecOps in our unique environment. We've got to help them, and that's what our organization does, to do exactly that. But I think one of the cool things that we're doing, and hopefully the community will join us, is we're going to be setting up this battle rhythm that is pain point focused. We're going to have an enterprise backlog of problems that people encounter with the software acquisition pathway, and then we're going to swarm on that as a community and then really help make sure that anyone else facing this coming along will have the ability to overcome that much faster, because a transformation can take like 6 years to do. We really don't have that time frame anymore if we want to win a future fight in this era of great power competition. So the key will be infusing all those lessons learned and quick wins and getting that information into the influencers at the 1-star and 2-star flag officer and SES level, and then they will promulgate that downward. But a growth mindset is so much a part of this, because those lessons learned that we're talking about infusing are going to include things like viewing risk in a new way, or attacking security in a way that you've never done before. And so that whole idea of a growth mindset says to drop everything that you've thought was appropriate and learn a new way. And if you are fixated in an older mindset, it's just not going to work. In fact, I think Microsoft is really a company that asks, how did we become one of the most innovative companies in the world? And the fact of the matter is, the CEO, Satya Nadella, credits a growth mindset and culture where there's extreme collaboration and willingness to not hold on to traditions and do things differently. So I think we have a lot of work to do in this area of change management and growth mindset.
Okay, we'll get to the audience Q&A, but I just wanted to give Amy a quick chance to pile on if you wanted. I was thinking too, especially with these demos, it's a wonderful snapshot in time where we get to do some measurement in terms of digital engineering techniques that will hopefully influence policy, but was curious whether you had any thoughts about where we might go from there. And you've talked a lot in your earlier remarks about using the data to build models, to build the infrastructure that helps do testing and evaluation, especially in operationally relevant ways, more expeditiously. I wondered if you had any thoughts there about where we continue to go and continue to use that data and model building.
Can you hear me?
Yes, yeah, that's great.
Okay, so a little bit of audio issues here. I don't know that I got your whole entire question. I'm going to build on what Sean was talking about and just say, we see these 231 demos as being a vehicle for us to bring about that change in the department. Absolutely. And I'm grateful that there are people like Sean and Linda out there with the expertise to help make this happen too. From my time in the department, just a couple of things that I've learned over time, and I have stayed away from this. I much prefer wins and zeros, than this. The soft sciences or the hard sciences, right? So I applaud people who can do this better than I. The couple of things I've seen, good work is necessary but not sufficient. You have to rely on it. You should always do it, but you should never rely on it. And then leadership is key, right? Leadership is key in this. And I think we've seen some great examples out of the Air Force acquisition executive on his focused leadership in this arena. It requires dogged persistence, and you have to be in it for the long term. So Sean's comment about 6 years, being too long, agree, right? That said, when a GOFO comes in for 2 years, 3 years, 18 months, doesn't really give them enough time to make change the way we need change to come about. So we really need senior leaders who are focused on it and in it for the long term. Over.
Great points, Amy. Thank you. And I know, just in the interest of time, I was going to go to Linda. I know we had a couple of good questions come up from the audience chat. We want to see if we can get through one or two. Let's see if we can use our last few minutes here.
Yeah, thanks, Forrest. There are a lot of good questions here. And what I thought I might do is combine a couple of them and see if we could roll them into one question, keying on what you said, Sean, about kind of needing a growth mindset from the community now. And Amy, what you just said about the soft side of things, which is near and dear to my heart. But we have a question about kind of, on the one hand, what folks can learn from the pilots, and on the other hand, how people can contribute to this growth. So I thought I'd combine those and ask two together, which is, can you talk about any of the new emerging tools or technologies that have come out of the pilots? And can you give some examples of challenge areas where you need more input?
Yeah, I mean, I'll take a shot at this first. The three areas that are really problematic for us are not so much technical, but programmatic. A lot of people say tech is easy. I don't agree with that. Brain surgery is easy for brain surgeons too. But I do think that some of the highest paid engineers out there are DevSecOps full stack engineers, and there's a reason that they're compensated that way. Tech talent is very important, but really, truly in our world, the programmatic issues are the ones that are eating our lunch, such as how do you estimate for this new paradigm, right? We have responsibility, authority, and accountability to the taxpayer and the Congress, and we have these budgeting processes and cycles that I think have received not as much attention as modernization of material acquisition and the requirements process. But I would say the top 3 pain points that we're hearing from the community is, that's great, how do I estimate and budget for this rapid cycles and this uncertainty? And that gets into build to budget type things and portfolio-based estimation, but we haven't worked through that. And the other piece is requirements. The pathway, you are exempt actually from the JSID's classic requirements validation process, except when we work with the vice chairman and the Joint Chiefs of Staff to stand up a new expedited process. But folks are still trying to feel their way through how they actually use inherited legacy requirements documents approved by the Joint Staff and migrate to this new world. And the second place is multi-pathway adoption. So how do I use the software pathway to decouple software acquisition from the platform or weapon system and use a different acquisition pathway and set of rules to acquire the weapon system platform? We afford a lot of flexibility. We're not dictatorial at all, but now we need to figure out, so how does this work in practical terms? So I'd say those are the 3 biggest pain points we're hearing.
Amy or Shane, you want to take a shot? Or?
Yeah, sure. I'd like to add to that as well. I noticed one of the biggest things that I've seen from a cultural and communication standpoint is, the programs within the department's ability to flatten out their organization. And what I mean by that is, and Kessel Run has done a really great job with this. I've had the privilege of seeing that firsthand with some work that I've done with them. But kind of eliminating that hierarchical totem pole structure that is so inherent to the military and to the department, being able to have the comfortability to reach out to people, whether regardless of rank, regardless of position or their place on the organizational structure, just from an engineering perspective, or just to ask a question. Having that culture of being able to reach out to anyone for pretty much, anything at any time is something huge that has, given Kessel Run really the momentum that it has to be able to make the strides that they have. And I think that that's something that the department really has to work on. And it's something that's just inherently, ingrained in the military, the being afraid to, jump rank or with a question or to be able to be reprimanded for asking something that may be, out of line. But, to create that culture of complete transparency that's really necessary, first and forehand for DevSecOps is something that, it has been done. And, like I said, I think Kessel Run has done a great job. So it's definitely possible, but just something that I've noticed and, needs to be worked on.
Great, thanks. And I think we have a few seconds left, Amy, if you want to jump on real quick.
I will, and very quickly on top of that. So I concur, right? I echo Sean and Shane's comments. So to Shane's point, lots of stories I could tell, but let me just simply say I would much rather have 50 good software engineers than 500 mediocre software engineers. And I could get a program done more quickly with that. So I totally agree on the flattening out idea. And then for Sean, I totally concur. Technology isn't usually the problem in the DoD. Depending on how you interpret technology. So I mentioned before in our demos, I don't see us inserting a lot of new tech. I see us doing a lot of integration. And that's really the hard problem for the DoD, because that kind of is the middle ground between the technology and the organization, right, and the culture. So our pilots would be very integration focused, common data models, and that is a hard thing for the DoD to do. So I concur with both Sean and Shane. Over.
Great. Well, thank you. First off, thank you for the great answers, and thank you all for being here today. As always with these kind of panels, I wish we had all day to talk through some of these issues because there's just so much here to unpack. But I think hopefully the audience agrees, but I think we've hit some of the major wave tops here. And again, I think that this only continues as we go forward. It's very transformative work, and I think there's a real need for continuing to look at the evidence and building the confidence that we're on the right technical approach as we go forward. So thank you all for being here, and thank you all for your work in making that all happen. And with that, I think we have to sign off here.